Trump thinks Canada is great. So great, in fact, that he'll let us keep the national anthem when he takes over. But is there a bigger plan?
Keeping O Canada, the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great.
Meanwhile, Mark Carney says, guess what? The carbon tax is back. And apparently, it gives us the advantage over the United States.
Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the European Union? Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon. To leapfrog over American companies where they're trying to turn back the clock and look inwards.
But wait, there's more. Carney says if America ever attacked Canada, NATO would be forced to step in under Article 5.
I would know, let me state the obvious, which is that all of us are members of NATO. All of us have to respect Article 5 of NATO.
And get this, Trump just said a liberal Canada would be better for his agenda. Did he just endorse Mark Carney?
Make them more hostile to us and possibly
no, I'd rather
open the
deal
door
with a liberal than a
for China, closer to Canada.
But before we even process that, boom, the JFK files drop and they point directly at the CIA. Turns out they might have known way more than they let on. Maybe even played a role.
The evidence is starting to look more and more like they were setting up Oswald and that the anti-Castro group were the people who might have pulled the triggers. So I think there's a...
Now, here's where it gets even wilder. Trump and Putin are talking about ceasefires, and Putin, he's agreed to a 30-day pause on attacking energy and infrastructure. But ask yourself this, if the United States was there, would there be World War III already? Stranger things have happened.
Vladimir Putin agreed to a ceasefire immediately on energy and infrastructure,
Right.
but not to a 30-day ceasefire.
There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous, but, you know, strange things happen.
And speaking of big moves, here's the real question. Does Donald Trump want Canada's water? The media seems to say so and says we should be cautious, but what's really going on?
As I said, if you follow the paper trail as well as the rhetoric trail, then I think, you know, the signs are starting to align. So I would say that we would be right to be cautious right now.
So stay tuned, because we're breaking it all down. Hit like, share, and subscribe, because the truth won't spread itself.
It's so perfect as a great and cherished state. Keeping O Canada, the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states, maybe our greatest state. But why should we subsidize another country for $200 billion? It costs us $200 billion a year. And again, we don't need their lumber. We don't need their energy. We have more than they do. We don't need anything. We don't need their cars. I'd much rather make the cars here. And there's not a thing that we need. Now, there'll be a little disruption, but it won't be very long. But they need us. We really don't need them. And we have to do this. I'm sorry, we have to do this.
What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Is Donald Trump just talking out of his ass, or does he really need us? Now, on to Mark Carney and his carbon tax comeback. Check this out.
Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the European Union? Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon. The Americans are going to start caring about this again. They have elections every 4 years. They cared a great deal about this 3 months ago. Now all of a sudden they don't care about it. They're going to care about it again. We have an enormous opportunity here in Canada. The United Kingdom has an enormous opportunity. France has an enormous opportunity. Europe has an enormous opportunity to leapfrog over American companies where they're trying to turn back the clock and look inwards. We're going to take that opportunity. We're going to take that opportunity. It's going to create jobs and it's going to create new markets for our country.
So let me know in the comments below. Do you think Carbon tax Carney's new carbon tax will increase jobs in Canada, or will it make it harder for the average Canadian to survive? And let's check out what he has to say about NATO and Article 5.
Minister Catherine Cullen from CBC. I noticed you said we have a steadfast defender in our sovereign. Behind closed doors, did any of the leaders you met with today offer assurances that they would have Canada's back if Donald Trump uses greater economic force or more to annex or absorb Canada?
Well, I would note, let me state the obvious, which is that all of us are members of NATO. All of us respect Article 5 of NATO.
Carney might think it's a joke, but what do you think? And let's get into the next video. Does Donald Trump endorse Mark Carney? Let's find out why.
The Liberal guys,
I love his wife.
the Liberal
I love
Party is going to
everything.
win now in the next election,
I don't
most
care.
likely. And they were
I don't care.
down and out.
I don't
Isn't that
care.
going to make them more hostile to us and possibly
No, I'd
open
rather
the
deal
door
with a Liberal than a
for
conservative.
China closer to Canada, and that would really put us in a bind.
The conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So when he says negative things, I couldn't care less. I think it's easier to deal actually with a Liberal. And maybe they're going to win, but I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me at all.
So your end game is what with them?
My end game is I don't want to have a big deficit. I don't want to see the United States of America, and you say 60 and I say 200, but it doesn't matter. I don't want us to pay 60 or 200 billion dollars to a country that if they were a state, think of this, it would be our biggest, most beautiful, it would be great. This state, it would be cherished. We'd take care of it. The people would pay half what they're paying right now. Canada pays very little for defense. They think we're going to defend
We protect them.
What?
We protect them.
We protect them.
Let me know what you think. Did Donald Trump that just endorse Mark Carney? Now, let's get into the JFK files.
History of the assassination well, presidential historian and author James Robinault. What have we learned today, James?
Well, Austin, we learned a lot about the CIA. Most of these documents are CIA-type documents. From their plan to try to assassinate Castro, Operation Mongoose is what it was called. Lots of detail on that, involving mafia figures to help them. It's an incredible story. To Jack Ruby and Oswald being seen in a nightclub, according to a CIA memo, weeks before the assassination, to all sorts of discredit on the single bullet theory that the ballistics people thought, that this just didn't happen back when the Warren Report came out, to the CIA operation out of Mexico City and all the intelligence they were gathering on Oswald. So it is a truckload of information. It's going to take weeks to analyze their 100-page depositions in it. It truly is a real trove of information that begins to paint a much stronger picture that the CIA knew kind of what was coming and may have been involved in the group out of Miami that was the anti-Castro group that may have been setting up Oswald. So a ton of stuff.
Does this change the official narrative?
I think it will. I mean, I think what we're going to, and as I've said before, this is like a big jigsaw puzzle. And we have a lot of pieces in place. What we didn't know were some of the identities of some of these people, and the CIA documents, everybody's got a code name. So that's going to take a long while for people to unravel. But I think it's going to show that they were very active with the group that was entangled with Oswald in New Orleans in the summer of 1963. And the evidence is starting to look more and more like they were setting up Oswald and that the anti-Castro group were the people who might have pulled the triggers. So I think there's a lot here.
Holy cow. What do you guys think about the JFK files? Is that something that interests you? Or is it just another conspiracy? Now, let's talk about, does Donald Trump want Canada's waters?
So is this a matter of, again, kind of reading between the lines here with this rhetoric, these executive orders? Is there really a concern with just the pause of these negotiations?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, as I said, if you follow the paper trail as well as the rhetoric trail, then I think, the signs are starting to align. So I would say that we would be right to be cautious right now, and to certainly keep our eyes on the prize and make sure that we're following what is happening conclusively. But at this point, negotiations are just paused. They have not been canceled. Mm-hmm. The agreement in principle that is in place is still in effect. And as of right now, it is technically business as usual, other than the negotiations aren't happening around ratifying that treaty in Congress.
Amid all of this, Canadians have been very sensitive and concerned about issues around sovereignty. What is at risk when it comes to that? What should we be concerned with regard to water?
Yeah, well, that's just it, right? I mean, the Columbia River Treaty suffers from the fact that it was already under negotiation and had only an agreement in principle that had been reached at the time that the new Trump administration took over. But this really speaks to Canadian sovereignty and water sovereignty in particular, which has been a long-standing back and forth conversation between Canada and the U.S. The Great Lakes have been no stranger to conflict and negotiation.
That's come up as well, yeah.
Exactly. But I think what we're seeing now is an unfortunate change in tone and spirit and intent that is changing the nature of that conversation and the seriousness of this conversation. And particularly in the last week, the comments around revising the treaty boundaries. And of course, what Donald Trump is talking about there are the boundaries that are laid out in the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 that actually determine where the US ends and where Canada begins. And those were surveyed as a result of the Boundary Waters Treaty.
What do you think? Does Donald Trump want Canada's water? And finally, the story that everyone's been waiting for. Putin and Trump talk, and Putin agrees to a 30-day ceasefire, but only on what?
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We got a readout of your call with Vladimir Putin, and it was a fairly optimistic take. Vladimir Putin agreed to a ceasefire immediately on energy and infrastructure, right, but not to a 30-day ceasefire. Tell us what happened.
Well, you have a situation where you have a lot of guns pointing at each other foolishly, because it would have never happened if I were president. That was not a war that was supposed to happen. And it did happen. So that's where we are. And right now, you have a lot of guns pointing at each other. And a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They're nicely encircled, and that's not good. And we want to get it over with. Look, we're doing this. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous. But, strange things happen. And I think we had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things and toward getting it to peace. And we talked about other things also.
Was there non-negotiables mentioned by Putin? It was reported that I think the Kremlin media actually stated that he demanded an immediate cessation of aid to Ukraine in order to get to this multi-step deal.
No, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid, actually. We didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed.
So what's really going on here, folks? Does Donald Trump really want to come after Canada? Let me know your comments below. As always, hit like, share, and subscribe. And with that said, I hope you enjoy your day, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again.